see the other 10 log events. FortiGate also shows you that you have 237 logs that are found and only 10 logs are returned. 6.4 is one of the latest releases of Fortinet, and they're doing a great job from release to release, adding new features. And up until now, there were dozens of videos all over describing the new features of 6.4. Well, I've decided to create one that will focus on the more friendly features of 6.4. So let's start. The first friendly feature, is the execute speed test that you can do on your WAN interface. To do so, you'll have to have the SD-WAN network monitor license. Once you have one, you can jump up to your WAN interface and execute a speed test. Now, when you do so, the results will be added to your estimated bandwidth, the estimated WAN bandwidth, but you will have to be connected to FortiGuard and to, I believe, Google's or AWS speed test servers. The second friendly feature is a fantastic one. I've been always asked when dealing with security profiles, which feature is supported either in flow-based inspection mode or in proxy-based inspection mode. And it seems that you, up until 6.4, you had to remember which feature is supported and where. So from now, you can actually create a new security profile. And if you wish to see which feature or which capability is supported under the proxy inspection mode, the only thing that you need to do is to click on the proxy based, and there you will see that you can only use content disarm and reconstruction under the proxy based mode. The same goes to web filter. Just click on the proxy based and you will see the features that are supported only on a proxy-based inspection mode. The next friendly feature is actually not a feature. It is a way of describing things much more clearly. So when you go to a network SD-WAN and you add up new interfaces to be part of the SD-WAN interface, and the next thing is to create an SLA, a performance SLA, where you configure the SLA server and the SLA target. The next thing is to go to SD-WAN rules. Now in SD-WAN rules, at the end you actually create your SD-WAN strategy. The SD-WAN strategy can be manual, best quality, maximize bandwidth, and lowest cost. I can tell you that every student ask me, what does it mean? What is best quality? What is maximized bandwidth? So finally, Fortinet actually describes each strategy and what it does. The next friendly feature is a cool feature, which is the IP address tooltip. Whenever you hover with your mouse over an IP address, it will show up more information on that IP address. So let's go to login report and application control, and let's see what happens when we hover towards that IP address. Well, we can see that the owner is Google. We can see the location, which is England. We can also see the latitude, longitude, and the running services. Let's go to another IP address, and that IP address also is owned by Google. Let's find an IP address which may not be owned by Google. Alright, so we have an IP address that the owner is Amazon, and it seems as the local CDN here in Israel, Tel Aviv. Another friendly feature is the Add widget, which is now much more organized than it was before. You have dozens of widgets. Some of them are new. I believe that the IPsec and the SSL VPN widgets are new. And you have a bunch of Wi-Fi widgets that shows you the channel utilization of the access point, clients per access point, interfering access points, and so on. And the last friendly feature is the fact that you now don't have an IPv4 policy and an IPv6 policy. You only have a firewall policy. You can add up an IPv6 or an IPv4 address object to be added to the source and destination fields in your one policy. You're a small business, very small. 6 employees, 6 computers, 1 switch, 1 access point, an ISP router, 1 subnet, and a network attached storage that serves as a file server. That's right, no domain controller servers, no clustering, everything is flat and simple. But you still want to protect your network assets. You still want to be able to connect to your file servers from remote, give permissions to the management to specific domains, and you decided to buy a firewall, a small firewall, not too fancy. So here are the 7 things you must do in order to start and work with your firewall. All right, so the following are the basic steps that you as a small business will need to do once you get your FortiGate or any other firewall in your business. Now, the very first thing, remember, once you configure your firewall, you're the administrator of that firewall. You're the super admin. So you will need to hardening your account. You can use two-factor authentication. You can also use an email-based mean to get a token in your email. I have done a video on that before, and you can just click the link above and go straight to it. Another thing is trusted host. You will need to configure either 1, 2, or 3 IP addresses that the admin can actually connect from to the management interface of your FortiGate. So configure your office address, configure your home address. Don't let anyone get into your FortiGate from outside. The second thing that you can do is to segment your network. Now, even if you have only 6 or 10 employees, and 3 of them are in the marketing department, and 4 of them are doing sales, create a new interface. You have lots of switch ports on your FortiGate, and even if don't, you can create virtual LANs. So let's create an interface. Let's just name our interface sales. The role of that interface is local area network. Just assign specific subnet to that interface. This is a private IP address. Use for management HTTPS and SSH. HTTPS to get to that interface through the GUI, and SSH is through the command line, and just configure a DHCP server. Now, you probably have only about 5 to 6 employees, so don't use the full pool. You can use if in our case it's 10.0.9.2, so let's use it up until .10. Now you can do many other things. We will not get into it right now, but this is the basics of just creating a new interface, and be sure to connect those employees through their computers to that specific switch on your FortiGate, either using a switch or directly. All right, now once you've built the interfaces, you can actually start to configure some rules. Let's just use basic rules for now. We head over to policy and objects, IPv4 policies, create new, and let's just create a sales policy. Now, we're not limiting no one in our sales department. So the incoming interface is sale, the outgoing interface is our WAN interface, the interface that is connected to our ISP router. As for source, currently we will use all, but we will create a firewall address object very soon, and we can actually use it in our firewall policies. In terms of service, we will allow any service, any protocol to go through this firewall policy. We will enable NAT. We will not use currently our security profiles. We will do it soon. And we will log just about every session, not only security events session. All right. So that's our sales policy. Let's create a new policy. Let's name it marketing. And incoming interface is our marketing. Outgoing is our WAN. Source all. Destination all. Service all. Let's just enable logging for all sessions. All right, the next thing to do is to actually create a virtual LAN for our access point. Now, there are times when you need to create another broadcast domain which is on top of physical ports. So if your FortiGate has 8 ports, you can actually create on top of each port VLANs, virtual LANs that you can connect to that switch, and from there to outsource employees or other employees. So let's just use the sales port to create another interface, which is our VLAN interface. Let's name it outsource 2, and we will use a tagging of 300. Let's also use it here. And the interface, as we said, is the sales interface. Now let's configure an IP address as we do in just about every subnet, every LAN that we have. So we'll use the 192.168.2.1/24, and we'll use administrative access, HTTPS and SSH, and we will actually list the full pool in our DHCP server. We will not limit it to only specific number of IP addresses. Okay, now once we have that VLAN on our sales interface, that's VLAN 300, we need to create a policy that will allow any traffic that is coming from that VLAN to get out to the internet. So we will again create a new policy. Let's name it outsource 2. The incoming interface is our VLAN, is outsource 2, and the outgoing is our WAN interface. Now, anyone can connect to that VLAN, anyone can go anywhere, but in terms of service, we will not allow any service out there. We will use HTTPS, HTTP, all right, and DNS. All right, now let's just apply that, and now we have a new policy that allows anyone that connects to it to get out to the internet only using HTTP, HTTPS, and DNS. All right, now let's create a firewall address object. Why do we need a firewall address object? Well, sometimes we have different computers on our subnet that we want to limit or to grant access to specific services, and that's a good way to create a policy that is more granular. So to create a firewall address object, we'll go to policy and objects, addresses. Now let's decide that our firewall address object will be for the marketing division. That's at the 10.0.5.0 subnet. And we know that we have a user that has the 10.0.5.3 IP address, and we want to limit it from sending pings, sending ICMP protocol pings. So how do we do that? We go to the policy and objects, addresses, create new address. Now let's name our computer limited ICMP. That's a nice name. Let's use the IP range and let's use the 10.0.5.2 up to 10.0.5.2, or we said that it will be .3. And the interface is the marketing interface. Okay, we can also use static route configuration if we want to use it in a specific static route, but we don't need it for now. Let's just apply that. And now let's create a new policy. And in our new policy, we will name it no ICMP for that specific device. So the incoming interface is marketing, the outgoing is the WAN interface, and the source is the new limited ISP source that we have just created. Destination all, service ICMP. We want to limit it from sending ICMP ping. So we'll choose all ICMP and ping, and in the action we will choose deny. Okay, so now we have a policy that denies ICMP or denies pings from that specific users. Now for that policy to work, we need to actually move that policy before the marketing policy. So our firewall will look at that policy, will understand that that specific device, which belongs to the marketing division, doesn't have full access the same as the other user. It limits him from sending ICMP. Now the next thing you will need to do is to create a static route so that all packets from different interfaces will know where to go in order to get out to the internet. So to do so, you'll go to network static route, create new static route. Now I have already created one here. That's my static route. The destination is all zeros. That is, every packet that is destined anywhere and doesn't have a route in the routing table will go through that static route. You will need to choose the interface. In our case, that's the WAN interface, which is connected to our ISP router. We will not look at the administrative distance or the priority of that route, but know that you can actually prioritize different static routes on your FortiGate firewall. Alright, so we actually reached our final step, final configuration, which is applying security profiles to your policies. Now, you can find security profiles just beneath policy and objects, and you have different security profiles. Each security profile have its own knowledge base, and you can find dozens of videos in my channel that explains how to work with antivirus, web filter, DNS filter. The idea is that you actually create a security profile and then you apply it on your policy. So let's just open one policy, let's edit it, and here you can find the different security profiles. Once you enable it, it actually scans the traffic and looks for viruses, malware, spam, domains that are not permitted, and other things. Application control is probably one of the most used security profiles out there. Now, each application in the application database has its own unique ID. It can be TeamViewer, Netflix, Amazon apps, or any other application. Now, your application sensor actually uses the IPS engine that looks at the different protocols, looks at the different traffic, decodes the protocol, looks for patterns, and then when it knows that a specific application flows through the different interfaces, it tells so in the session list. So let's take a look at how the application unique ID shows up in the session table. Alright, so the very first thing that we need to do is to head over to FortiGate Labs, Threat Lookups, Application Control. Now here we can look at the different unique IDs that each application has. Let's look at TeamViewer. All right, we have different vulnerabilities, but we will look at the application category. And here we have TeamViewer, and let's just press it. And there it is. That's the unique ID of TeamViewer. The second app that we will look is Netflix. There we have Netflix, and Netflix has the unique ID of 18155. All right, so let's move to our Ubuntu device. And let's just enable TeamViewer. Oh, there it is. All right, and it is working. So let's move back to our FortiGate. Let's just use the DIEX session list. And we see that we have dozens of sessions. We cannot actually look at the different sessions, so we will use the grep command. And the very first app that we will look is the Netflix app, 18155. 18155. And there we have it. We have a session, that's the session ID. The serial is actually the session ID, and we have a session that actually the Netflix app actually uses. So that's the app ID. So let's get back to our Ubuntu. And let's look at the TeamViewer. It is working. And there we have it. That's the session ID, and that's the app, the TeamViewer app that actually initiated that session. Asymmetric encryption is being used just about everywhere. Let's look at the following scenario, and then we will dive in and understand how it actually works. So let's assume that Eve wants to send a message to Bob. She writes down the message, she encrypts it using its own symmetric key, and then when it is all encrypted, it is being sent to Bob. Now, Bob knows the key. It knows the symmetric key that Eve used. He uses it, and by that, he actually decrypts the message. Now, if you think about it, we actually achieved only one thing. We encrypted the message. But then again, we have other challenges. The first one, how can we deliver the key between Eve and Bob? Let's assume that Eve and Bob doesn't live close by. The second challenge is, how can we tell that the message wasn't modified? How can we tell that no one actually modified with the bits of the message itself? And the third challenge, how can we tell that the person who claims to be Eve is really Eve? For that, we have asymmetric encryption coming up. When Eve encrypted her message, she actually used a symmetric encryption, and the key that was used by the algorithm was known also to Bob. Let's just take a look at the terminal, and let's just make it bigger, and let's generate a random key. So we'll use for that OpenSSL rand, which is a command that allows you to generate pseudo-random numbers, integers. Let's use a key in hexadecimal, and let's use an 8-byte key, and that is the key. That is the key that could be used in asymmetric key encryption and that both parties should be aware of. So if we get back to Eve and Bob, Eve used this key with its algorithm. It could be either AES, it can be DES, it can be 3DES, any symmetric encryption algorithm. And Bob used the same key. So both parties has the same key. They both know that the algorithm is either AES or 3DES, and the message could be decrypted on the other side. On asymmetric encryption, Eve actually generates two keys, key pairs. They may look similar, but they are actually different, mathematically related, but different. The first key is the private key. The private key is actually the secret key that Eve needs to keep in a secret place. The second key is the public key, and as the name suggests, it is public. Everyone can use that key. Now, when Bob gets the key, it can use it for asymmetric encryption and actually decrypt messages that were sent by Eve. It can also encrypt his own messages using the public key, and from there just send it back towards Eve and Eve can decrypt it. So if we'll go back to OpenSSL, let's just write down OpenSSL, GNRSA. RSA is one of the algorithms of asymmetric encryption, and we'll use the 2048-bit key. And that's our private key. That's our private key. We can actually generate the public key from the private key that we have just generated. But that's the private key that Eve has actually generated. And as we said, it should be kept secret. And there we have it. Eve generates a private key and a public key and sends the public key again to Bob. Now Bob gets its public key, and from now on it can decrypt Eve's messages. Now think about it. The fact that only his public key can decrypt Eve's messages suggests that the message actually came from Eve. That's one way to authenticate the other side. Now, in fact, asymmetric encryption is not used to encrypt the session itself, the data, the payload that is being sent from Eve to Bob and vice versa, for many reasons. One of them is the size of the keys. So what actually is being done is that the private and the public keys are being used to encrypt the session keys, the symmetric encryption keys. They are much smaller in size and they are being decrypted and encrypted much faster than asymmetric encryption keys. So Eve can actually generate a pseudo-random key that is a symmetric key, encrypt it using its own private key. Bob can get the encrypted message, open it with its own public key, and now he knows what is the symmetric key that Eve will use to encrypt the whole session. Auditing your firewall is a major task that you need to do from time to time. Now, there are companies that release tools that will allow you to audit your firewall, but here is the 10 best practices that you can start with. The following best practices are not in a specific order, so just use them as you wish. Now, another thing, I'm showing it on a FortiGate firewall, but you can also do it on a Checkpoint firewall, on the Palo Alto firewall, any next generation firewall. quite obvious, but we do it on any device, any servers that we have on our organization. Be sure that your firmware is up to date. Always use the latest firmware. Usually the latest firmwares are much more secure. Your firewall vendor will always make sure that you have the latest patches on the latest firmware. So back up your configuration, look at the release path, and update your firmware. Encryption and high encryption is fundamental in your firewall. So be sure that you always use the strongest algorithms. Now, it's not always possible, but assuming that the other side also supports the strongest algorithms, just find out the appropriate CLI command on your firewall and enable it. So in a FortiGate firewall, it is config system global. Now it may change from firmware to firmware. Set crypto strong and just be sure to enable it. Always make sure that your administrator is connecting to your FortiGate through a trusted host. That is a trusted IP address as the IP address at its home or in the office. Now, you can do it using the graphical user interface. You can do it using the CLI. Let's do it using the CLI, config system admin. Let's edit the admin. And from here, set trusted host. And just write down the trusted IP address. If possible, on your WAN interface, your external facing interface, don't allow any administrative management. So let's just use the config system interface, edit port 1, which is my internet facing interface, and unset allow access. On your LAN interface administrative access, try always to use HTTPS and SSH, that is HTTPS to the graphical user interface and SSH to the command line. Now try to avoid ping and try to avoid other protocols unless needed. The following is probably one of the first audits that you need to do. Look for unused rules that were asked time ago and configured on your firewall. Look for them, and if they're not relevant anymore, just delete them. Now, a side note, document any rule that is asked. Document who asked the specific rule and the time that it was configured. Your administrator should always log into your FortiGate or any other firewall using HTTPS. So be sure that even if it tries to do it over HTTP, your firewall will redirect the request over HTTPS. So let's do it here. Config system global, set admin HTTPS redirect. Another setting that you should be aware of is the admin lockout and the admin lockout duration. Now, that should comply with your organization policy. Config system global. And now let's set the admin. You can set the admin lockout duration. The default is 60 seconds, but you can set it to 5 minutes or more. That should comply to your organization policy. Now, another setting is the threshold itself. That is, the lockout threshold is actually the number of failed attempts, when your admin tries to log into the system. The default is 3, and it is a best practice to keep it at 3. Logs should be part of your auditing. That is, when you audit a firewall, be sure that logs are there for at least 7 days. Now, look at the proper documentation of your firewall. Let's just do it here. Config log disk setting, set maximum age. Now, you can set it to 7 days. You can also set it to 30 days. It depends a lot where you save the logs, either on your hard disk or towards a syslog or any other device that has a proper storage. At last, let's look at some more best practices to hardening your firewall. One of them is when you have unused interfaces, disable them. Disable them. If you have interfaces that you want to disable different protocol, so just disable them using config system interface, edit the interface that you want to disable, and there you can unset DHCP relay services, you can unset PPTP client, ARP forwarding, and so on. Another thing that is quite common to any FortiGate out there, and that is something that I'm not familiar with other firewalls which have maybe yes or no the same functionality, is what is known as the maintainer account. The maintainer account is actually a backdoor to your FortiGate. If your admin has lost its password, then it allows you to actually put into your FortiGate using what is known as the maintainer account, which is actually the serial number of your FortiGate with the maintainer user. So you can actually disable it. In most FortiGates, I believe that it is enabled by default. Set admin maintainer account disabled. So you've got your new FortiGate. How do you configure it? Coming up. To get more easy setup tips for your FortiGate firewall, subscribe now and don't forget to click on the bell notification and you won't miss anything. So you've got your new FortiGate and your new two FortiGate firewalls. What do you need to do? You have probably connected your FortiGate using a network cable to your computer and configured it. FortiGate appliances comes with at least port 1, one of the ports, which is usually port 1, that is already configured with the IP address of 192.168.199. You need to configure your PC subnet to be on that same subnet, get to the IP address of the interface, of the port 1 interface, and from there you're actually starting to configure your FortiGate. Now you can configure a FortiGate using the graphical user interface, which has many features. It even has a feature visibility feature in the system settings so that you can disable or enable new features which are not available over here. Now you can configure your FortiGate using the graphical user interface, and you can configure it using the command line. FortiGate experts use the command line almost all of the time. We will look at the command line, but we will make our way using the graphical user interface. To get to the command line, you need to click here. It is actually a JavaScript app that runs on top the admin web app. Um, Probably the first thing that you want to do is to write down get system status, so you can see your FortiGate serial number, which ASICs, which um, accelerated hardware does it support. Are you using a hard disk or a flash drive? The current security profile database, and so on. Now, we went into the interfaces. You probably have one interface that you're connected to, which will be the management interface. Now you need to connect one of your WAN interface to your ISP, either through a modern router, or you can use your FortiGate as the router itself. Each interface has a physical switchboard that you can connect to different subnets in your network. Now let's just edit one interface. Let's see what's inside. You can name your interface according to the subnet in your local area network. Let's assume that we have a management subnet. All right, now you can define it a specific role. It can be a WAN, a DMZ, an undefined role, or a WAN. So let's use the LAN. So now we know that we have a management LAN connected to port 8 on our FortiGate. Now, the addressing mode can be manual, it can be DHCP. Let's use the manual option. And let's configure it to be 192.168.2.1/24, since we're using a 24 subnet. Now, this address is the gateway interface address. So any computer that will connect to one of the to port 8 will get an IP address in that subnet, that is the 192.168.2.0 subnet, but its gateway address will be 2.1. Now we will also open the DHCP server, so anyone that is connected, there's a pool of IP address that it will grab. We'll look at DHCP server very soon. Before that, we need to configure administrative access. Which protocol will support administrative access? We'll just use HTTPS and HTTP. For now, we can also use SSH. We can also configure it to support pings from host in that subnet or from a Forti manager, but we will not do it right now. LDP is a protocol that enables discovery between devices in the network. It doesn't really matter. You can disable or keep it for now. Now we have a DHCP server. As I said, any client that connects to that port will receive one of the IP addresses from the pool. You don't have to use all the pool. You can use only 20 IP addresses. You can keep the DNS server the same as configured here, or you can specify your own DNS server. Let's just specify Google's DNS server. You can control the list time, and if you click on the advanced, if you have a DHCP server that is part of your domain, which is not your FortiGate or your FortiGate interface, you can configure its IP address here, and then whenever a packet arrives on that interface, it will head over to the DHCP server. But for now, we're using the gateway interface as the DHCP server. You can configure an NTP server. You can configure, and this option is for more advanced users, DHCP scopes or options. And you can assign different IPs to different devices based on their MAC address. Another option is device detection. Device detections allows your FortiGate to detect which device and which operating system devices on the networks belongs to. This is one of the things that you should keep enabled. Don't bother with the explicit web proxy. You can enable a captive portal, so if you have outsourced employees and you wish to jump a landing page with user credentials, you can also do that, but we will skip it for now. So this is the basic configuration of the interface. Okay. So now we have a management interface. We have another interface, which is the WAN interface that you connect it. You connect it to your ISP router. We will call it WAN1. The role is WAN. We can use DHCP, and if we want to make it more reliable, we will use a static IP address. So my gateway interface is 10.0.3.75, and my router is actually 10.0.3.1. I've enabled HTTP and HTTPS, and as you can see, you don't have a DHCP server whenever the role of your interface is WAN. That is one of the best practices when using an interface as a WAN interface. Okay, so we have a management interface, we have a WAN interface. Now we want to make our managers that are connected to that port, which is port 8, to get out to the internet. So the next thing to do is to configure a policy. Now we will configure a very basic policy, which is a full access policy. Let's name it. Let's name it managers 1. And the incoming interface is management. That's the LAN interface of our managers. The outgoing interface is WAN1. That is the interface that is connected to our ISP router. That is the interface that takes them outside of the LAN towards the internet. Now, when it comes to source, for this video, let's make it very generic. Anyone can go. Anyone. We can configure user groups and different users. We can also configure sets of parameters that control the different users. But for now, as for source, anyone can get out. As for destination, they can go just about anywhere. We can also create specific objects that will allow them to go to specific places, but for now, they can go just about anywhere. As for scheduling, we're not limiting them to specific hours or days. So as for scheduling, again, they can get out to the internet any time of the day. As for service, we can deny them from getting out in specific services such as FTP, but for now, for our specific policy, we will let them use just about any service. Now, the action is accept. We can also create a policy that will deny specific services or specific users from getting out or from doing specific things. For now, the action is accept. Inspection mode is another topic that we will look into. That is the inspection that is done to our networks when we're using security profiles such as antivirus or IPS. For now, we will keep it at flow-based mode. Now, we will use NAT. NAT is Network Address Translation. That is our private IP address, which can be 192.168.2.6, will be translated to your FortiGate or to your ISP public internet address. Now we will not use security profiles. You know what? Let's use antivirus. Let's use the default profile, the default antivirus profile. We will use certificate inspection. When we use certificate inspection, your FortiGate checks the different fields that are coming from server certificates to see if they're valid, if it doesn't have any mismatches, and so on. The last thing is to use our logging options. We can log only security events, but we will log all sessions. So later on, we can look at the login report and see what our users or what our host did. Okay. So we have a managers one policy. We have two interfaces. The WAN one, which connects us to the outsides, and the management interface, which managers in our company can connect to and get their IP addresses. That was the second step. Now the third step is to configure a static route. A static route is actually, for our usage, will be a default route. That is, I've already configured one, so let's just look at it. If you want to create new, you just create new. So default route actually tells your FortiGate that whenever he sees a packet, any packet that is destined to any place which doesn't have a route at the routing table, it will route it towards the WAN interface. And the WAN interface address is a 10.0.3.1. Remember, my ISP router has that address. Now you can use specific parameters as distance. You can use priority. It just tells me that I already have that static route, which I do. And once we have a static route, a policy, and the interfaces that are configured correctly, we can now connect our host to the management interface, and those hosts can now get onto the internet. Let's just move to the CLI and let's see how do we configure interfaces using the CLI. So for the sake of our purpose, let's configure port 7. So using the CLI, we will use the config system interface. Now let's edit port 7 as we said. Let's set its IP to 192.168.4.1 with a subnet of 24. Let's set the management protocols to HTTP and HTTPS. And what else? We can use many more. If you will look at the, let's end it. Now I want to show you something. When you config system interface, let's just get out here. Config system interface, and if we look at port 1, for example, we can use the show full config, and as you can see, there are dozens of features of configurations that you can add. For our sake, we have only enabled the IP address on that interface, and let's look at it. Let's just refresh our page. Port 7, and there it is. Now we can also configure the DHCP server and so on. We have not done so on our CLI. The last thing I want to show you, once you get into your FortiGate, you're actually the FortiGate administrators. Now you have two types of administrators on, actually you have more than two types, but the two most common types is a super admin, which is you. You have privileges to just about anything. You can read and write, and you can create another type of administrator, which is the professional admin, where you can actually enable it, different read and write privileges on the different places on your FortiGate. If you will head over to the CLI and use the config system admin, and you can edit the admin name. I have two admins. I have one which is the super admin, and the second one which is offer test, which is my second admin. So now let's look at the different configurations that you can add to your admin. Again, lots of configuration. That's not the only place where you can configure different things. You can also configure it on a globally, which is the config system global. But one of the things that I wanted to show you is that you can strengthen your admin account by using a trusted host. So you can also look at it here. Here. You can configure a trusted host, that is a trusted IP address that only your admin can get from. So you can configure the IP address on your office at your work, and you can configure another trusted host, which is the IP address at your home. Only from those two IP addresses your admin can get into the FortiGate. You can also configure two-factor authentication, which is also a very common security procedure. You can use FortiToken, and you can also use your email as a two-factor authentication. Let's just show you how to do so. Let's clear that out. So we can use the config system admin set. No, let's edit the profile before and set two-factor email, set email to, and let's set it to one of my Gmail accounts. Let's end it, and now if we'll go back to our admin profile, let's view it again, and you can see that you can now use an email-based two-factor authentication. When you configure a captive portal to one of your LAN interfaces, you can change and customize the look and feel of it. Coming up. So we have our LAN interface, which is connected to my Ubuntu device. So let's just open up the interface itself. And in network security mode, let's just choose captive portal, and let's choose a group that it is associated with it. Now you can choose your guest group, your outsourced employee group, just about any group you choose. All right, now when we head to our device, so let's enter Firefox, and that's what we get. We get the Fortinet logo and the background is gray. Now we want to change it, so let's see how we do it. Let's just get back to our FortiGate. Now to do so, you need to go to System Replacement Messages. Now you have two views, the simple view and the extended view. We'll use the simple view, authentication, login page, edit. Here you will see the image itself and the HTML part. Now we will not get into the different texts that are in the login page. You can change it, but let's see how we change the image from Fortinet to FortiTip. All right, so to do so, we'll head over to Manage Images. Let's create new image. Let's name it FortiTip. And let's upload the image that we have already prepared. You need to have an image which is less than 24 kilobytes. All right, so that's the image. That's the name of the image. Let's name it FortiTip 1, since I already have a FortiTip image. All right, so here is FortiTip 1 and FortiTip. Now let's get back to our login page. Let's edit. Let's just scroll the HTML page and let's find the logo part. Here's the logo part. Currently it is with a background, a gray background. So let's change it to all Fs, that is white in hexadecimal values. And let's just change the image to FortiTip 1. There we have it. Now let's just save it. And now we have a new login page, a new HTML page with our new image. So let's get back to our Ubuntu device. So let's start Firefox again. And there it is, the new logo, FortiTip logo. And again, you can change the background as I did. You can change the different text that is within the login page. You can do many things with the login page. There are times when you need to back up your configuration and send it via email to another compliant FortiGate. Now, there is one thing that you need to add up to your backup configuration file. Coming up. So there's our use case. We have another FortiGate and we want to send it our primary FortiGate configuration. Now, the other FortiGate must be compliant, but we will not get into it. So let's look at the configuration file. That's the configuration file. Let's just open it. And there it is. Now, we don't want no one to tamper with our configuration file, to get into the file itself and change things. How do we do it? We make a checksum. We make a hash value of the configuration file and add up the hash value to our mail. So to do so, I'm using a Mac terminal, but you can use PowerShell. You can use just about any tool with the hash commands available. So in my case, it is SHA-SUM-A. Now, we need to choose the type of hash function. I'm using 256, but you can also use 1. In our case, it doesn't really matter. Now, let's just drag the file to our terminal, and there we have it. That's the hash value. That's the hash value of our configuration file. So the next thing to do is to copy it, open our email, and just be sure to add up the hash value of our configuration file. Now, the other side that gets the configuration file itself just grabs the file, makes the same operation, which is SHA-256 sum and the file path. It should get the same hash value. If it doesn't get the same hash value, then someone tampered with that file. There are different ways that you can prioritize your cloud apps over the other apps. One way is to use a traffic shaping policy. Here's how. The following scenario is quite typical for many businesses. Now, if you're using more than one WAN interface, you can use static route, create different static route to each WAN interface, and prioritize different internet services. You can also prioritize the interfaces. You can even use SD-WAN rules and performance SLA. Now, we will look at a case where we have only one WAN interface, and we will do it using the traffic shaping policy. So the very first thing that you will need to do is to move over to your policy and make sure that application control is on. The second thing you'll do is to move to security profile, application signatures, and there we will create an application group for the cloud applications that we used most often. So let's just name it cloud apps. And from here we can actually use the category, which can be cloud IT, or we can actually select our applications. So let's use the AWS, which we used often. Let's add up Salesforce. All right. And let's add up Office 365. There we have it. Now, let's just save our application group. We can see that we have a new application group that includes all of our cloud apps that our workers use most often. The third thing that you will need to do is to create a traffic shaping policy. Now, if you move to traffic shaping policy under policy and objects, you will see that you have two main traffic shapers. One is the high priority and the second one is the low priority. Both are in the shared IP shaper. So let's move to traffic shaping policy. Let's create a new traffic shaping policy. Let's just name our traffic shaping policy cloud apps. The source can be all, destination all, service all, in application. Now here is the place where we actually use our application group. So just look for the cloud apps that we have just created. That's our application group. And here in the shaper, we will actually apply, let's just add up the WAN interface. And here we will apply the high priority shaper. We will apply it in both shared shaper and reverse shaper, so that we'll have also the downlink and the uplink with high priority. Okay, so we have a policy, we have a traffic shaping policy for cloud apps. So let's create another traffic shaping policy for any other apps. All right, again, source all, destination all, service all. Now you can choose the applications, but you don't have to. And here in the traffic shaping place, let's just use the low priority, both in the shared shaper and in the reverse shaper. And now we actually have two traffic shaping policy if you enable application control on your policy, your application control sensor will actually notice whenever you use Salesforce or other cloud apps, and your traffic shaping policy will actually prioritize it over the other. Your FortiGate firewall is a session-aware firewall. It has its own session table, which can be seen using the Get System Session list. And there are cases when you need to tear down a specific session or the entire sessions that are on your FortiGate. How do you do it? Coming up. Your FortiGate is a session-aware firewall. It holds information on its session table and keeps looking at its session table every time a packet goes out through a different interface or gets into another interface. Your session table actually holds much more than this session itself. It holds the routes, that is, whenever your FortiGate does a route lookup, it saves the information in the session table. Now let's look at our session, Get System Session list. And we can see that we have dozens of sessions, some of them to the same destination. I currently have a Ubuntu device which is at the 10.0.5.4, and let's assume that I need to clear out all session. So the command for that is diagsys session clear. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's quite dangerous to clear out all sessions that are happening on your FortiGate. Instead, we will use the filter option. Now you can filter out different session either by source interface, destination interface, source, and even protocol, which is quite interesting. Now we will use the source. So let's use the source, which is the 10.0.5.4. And the next thing to do just after that is the diagsys session clear. Once you do so, just press the enter, and specific sessions, the sessions that you have filtered, will be terminated. Your FortiGate uses its memory for the different processes, either IPS, antivirus, or general functionality. Now, when it reaches your memory threshold, it gets into what is known as a conserve mode. How do you control it, and how do you decide which operations takes place when you enter conserve mode? Coming up. Getting into a conserve mode is not a desirable thing. Now, there are actually 3 thresholds that you can actually configure by yourself, and those thresholds determine when you enter a conserve mode, when you exit from a conserve mode, and when the sessions are being dropped as you're entering an extreme threshold. So let's take a look at it. Let's just stop our diagsys stop, and let's config system global. And in config system global, you can actually set the different thresholds. Now, the extreme threshold is actually the threshold or the percentage of total memory when your FortiGate starts to drop session. You can also set the green thresholds, which is the thresholds where your FortiGate exits from the conserve mode. And there's the red threshold, that is the thresholds when your FortiGate enters conserve mode. Now, when your FortiGate enters conserve mode, something happens. The first one, your FortiGate doesn't accept any configuration changes. The second thing, it doesn't execute any quarantines. Now, there are other things that you can configure as sessions on your IPS engines and antivirus. So let's just get out of the different thresholds. Config IPS global. Set fail open. Now you can decide either to enable fail open or disable. If you enable IPS fail open, packets will still flow, will still go through the different interfaces, but with no IPS inspection. If you choose to disable it, the packets that require IPS inspection will be dropped. Now, if you want to check if you're in the conserve mode or not, you can just use the diag hardware sysinfo conserve. If you do so, you can see that you're currently not in a conserve mode. If you were in conserve mode, you would see the on instead of the off. And you can also see your total RAM and the memory that is being used. You can also see that the threshold for the red extreme mode is actually 95% of total RAM. You will enter conserve mode at 88% of total memory, and you will exit from conserve mode when you get down the threshold of 82%. How do you control data consumption and bandwidth when everyone is at home? Coming up. To take control over data in COVID-19 times, we can use the traffic shaping policy in our FortiGate. So let's move to policy and objects, traffic shaper, create new shaper. Now we can use a shared shaper or we can use pair IP shaper. So let's use pair IP shaper. Let's name it COVID-19 streamer. So we'll know that it is for our streamer device. Now the maximum bandwidth, we will limit it to 30 megabits. And let's save our shaper. The second thing to do is traffic shaping policy. Let's move to traffic shaping policy, name our policy COVID-19. Now the source, we will need to create an address object for our streamer, so let's just do it. Let's streamer 1, since I already have one, 10.4.10.0.4.9/32. Okay, so we have our streamer device as our source. Destination is all. Now we can use specific applications such as Netflix and so on, but we do not want to limit our streamer device only to streaming applications. We want to limit the traffic as all. So we will not use the application or the URL category, but we will use in outgoing interface the WAN interface, and now we'll use the pair IP shaper. Select your traffic shaper that you have just configured, and that's about it. Crypto mining malware or cryptojacking is a form of a malware that actually uses your own resources to mine cryptocurrencies. Now, the attack vectors, the way that the crypto miners gets into your organization, can be either from botnets, it can be from malwares, it can be from JavaScripts that runs on your browsers. Now, as we've seen in the last several years, it can run on your routers, it can run on your PCs, on your Android smartphones, or on your servers. How do you protect your organization from crypto mining malwares? Coming up. Crypto mining software comes in many forms and can actually get into your resources from different locations. So how do you block them? Well, there's no one recipe. You will need to apply different security profiles. The first thing to do is to apply the antivirus security profiles in your policy. Why? Because Fortinet has actually included different signatures for crypto mining software. So if you're using either the normal database or the extreme database, just apply them to your policy. The second thing is to block different crypto botnets, and there are dozens of crypto botnets out there, so be sure to block botnets on your botnet package. The third thing to do is to block different applications that are related to cryptocurrency. How do you know which applications to block? Well, you can head over to the FortiGate Labs and just look for cryptocurrency. There you will find different applications that actually tries to mine different cryptocurrencies. So the thing to do is to open your application control, and in the application override, just find the different signatures and block them. The other thing, as we said, there are different JavaScripts that run on your browser, and you will also need to block them using your IPS signature. Which signature is that? So again, move to your FortiGate Labs, look for the different cryptocurrencies signatures, but if you want to be just a little bit more precise, look for javascript.cryptocurrency. And there you will find different generic JavaScripts that can run on your browser, and you need to block them. So just copy this one and block it on your IPS engine. On the following scenario, I will use the author microcontroller after connecting to it through the pwned SSID, and the authenticate, send deauthenticate, and deassociate frame, stores, and access point. Now, do it on your own risk. Do it only on equipment that you're allowed to do so, probably your own equipment. This demo is for educational purposes only. Alright, so to connect to the author page, we will head to the pwned SSID. Just type 192.168.4.1, and here we have several sections. The first one is the scan section, where your